Welcome to Logic Breaks. Today we will talk about a fallacy called false analogy. Just real quickly, let's talk about what analogy is to begin with. So an analogy is basically just comparing one thing in terms of another. So maybe you have a really abstract, complex kind of idea you're trying to explain to an audience, and you want to find something that they already understand. So you're using something that's familiar to them already to help them understand something a little new, complex, difficult to understand for that particular audience. Or for one of my favorite examples of that is by the author E.B. White. And probably a lot of you remember him as the author of Charlotte's Web or Stuart Little, also famous style guide for English, and many essays as well. But E.B. White had a very famous analogy. Explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process. So again, E.B. White saying that. So again, like you can dissect a joke, you can take it apart, look at how it works, try to understand it, but in the process, does it kind of die? Does it lose some of its humor? Is it not so interesting? You might have heard the term or the phrase, you're comparing apples to oranges. Well, apples and oranges do have some similarities, right? They are both fruits, they're both round-ish. They both come from trees, but are there some pretty big differences between them as well? One is citrus, one isn't. One grows in warmer climates, one grows in more temperate climates and even colder climates in some cases as well. So they're pretty different in some ways. You would never take an apple and say, well, this is a pretty good apple, but it's just not a very good orange. That wouldn't be a fair comparison. You're literally comparing apples to oranges. You want to compare different apples for different purposes, making pies or eating directly and compare different oranges to each other, depending on what your purpose is for those oranges. So again, that's when you hear somebody say you're comparing apples to oranges, they're basically accusing you of using a false analogy. Let's talk about a couple other examples of this. One thing that people like to do is compare humans to animals, humans to birds, humans to fish, humans to, you get the idea. One of my favorite examples is when people try to suggest that because humans are primates, that we ought to be just like all the other primates. So we say, hey, gorillas don't have social security, they don't have healthcare healthcare programs and so forth. So why should humans? Well, you can make arguments for and against, what level of social programs a government should have or whether they should have them at all. You can make those arguments, but the idea that simply because chimpanzees or gorillas or orangutans don't have those things is pretty absurd. What else do we have that they don't have? Do we solve differential equations? At least some of us, do we do that? Do we fly helicopters? Do we have other things that are more advanced than the other primates have? So we share a lot in common with primates genetically. Even some of our social structures are pretty similar, but we're also pretty different. So the idea that simply because we are also primates or we are also animals, and therefore we should be exactly like primates or other animals. Again, that is a false analogy. If you want to extend the false analogy to a humorous point, what else should humans be doing? Or should we be, throwing our poop around? Or what are the things we should be doing if we're going to be just like the monkeys or just like the chimpanzees or orangutans? Another example I like to use, motorcycles and bicycles both have wheels. They're both two-wheeled vehicles. Therefore, we should treat bicycles and bicyclists exactly the same as we should treat motorcycles. We should tax them, license them, all those kinds of things. You could argue about whether bicycles and bicyclists should be taxed and licensed and all those things, but simply the fact that they both have two wheels is probably not enough. What else is different about them? Well, one is usually much heavier than the other, the motorcycles. Do the motorcycles take a little bit more skill to know how to operate? Are they a little bit more dangerous to other people if we don't know how to operate them correctly? Do they potentially do more damage to the pavement than the average bicycle does? Again, maybe there are reasons to tax and license bicycles and bicyclists, but simply the fact that both bicycles and motorcycles have two wheels is not a good enough reason. Another example I like to use goes way back to Megyn Kelly a number of years ago. Whatever you think of her, I don't really follow her that carefully, but at the University of California, Davis, there was a protest, and one of the officers there pepper sprayed the protesters. And in response, Megyn Kelly said that pepper spray is essentially a food product. It's basically a food product. Like, well, no, there are some similarities uh, between habaneros and jalapenos and other hot peppers versus uh, versus pepper spray. They both contain capsaicin, for example, but are there some pretty big differences? One might be the concentration, one might be the intent. I would never purposely pepper spray myself, okay? But I would purposely eat a jalapeno. I've made that decision. I know what's coming. It's only going in my mouth. It's not going in my eyes or nose. Okay. Any of you who accidentally rubbed your eyes after touching a jalapeno or a habanero, no, that's not pleasant. So there are some pretty big differences. Yes, there's some similarities, but there are some pretty big differences as well. So again, that's probably a false analogy. Let us know what you think. Do you have some other examples? Do you have questions? What else would you like us to cover in the future?